At nearly 8 years of living in Italy, I'd be lying if I said to you that I'd had it easy because it has been a bit of a wild ride and I have learned some of my hardest lessons in this country. But in today's video, I'm sharing specifically with you 5 things that I have learned the hard way here in Italy so that you don't have to. You can thank me later. Lesson number 1, be meticulous with everything. This was a lesson that we learnt the hard way living in Palermo in our old home with our energy supplier, Iran, concerning the gas supply at our old apartment because we had to supply the meter reading every single month on a specific date to Iran for our gas supply. And on one such month, we were a couple of days late. And as a result, it triggered an estimated bill for the following month. Except when that estimated bill arrived, it was for the grand total of €4,000. Now consider we lived in an apartment, not in a villa. It was absurd. And of course, we immediately contested it. But Iran were fobbing us off, telling us somebody would come back to us. We kept giving them the requested time to process our dispute, but nothing was materializing. They were adamant that we had to pay it. And then to make matters even more absurd, they actually sent us a check for the exact same amount of money that they were telling us we ought to be paying them. It was mental. So it got me thinking at that point, like, how would I deal with this if I were living in the UK? And then I remembered that in the UK, there is an energy ombudsman who can deal with issues or problems that you have with your energy suppliers. And they are completely neutral and independent as an organisation. And so I started to see if there was something similar here in Italy. And I'm pleased to report that there is. I'm going to put a link below in the show notes in case you ever find yourself in an unfortunate situation like this, because I'm not the only person that's experienced this. These kinds of crazy things sometimes happen here. But essentially, it was thanks to them that we actually got the situation sorted. They were the only ones that were able to arrange a Zoom call with them and also a representative from Iran to try to resolve the situation. And what came to light during that Zoom call was the fact that they had us on a commercial rate premises bill, not on a residential one. And that was the reason why the estimated reading had been so high. So the biggest lesson I learned from that, which was eventually resolved, thankfully, after many, many painful months and stressful moments, was that you have to be meticulous. We hadn't noticed that in the contract that we'd signed with Iran, that we were actually on the rates and unit rates of a commercial premises and not on a residential one. So pay attention to the little tiny details of your contracts with any utility provider. But secondly, always make sure that you are on time providing your meter readings so that you never arrive at this point where you get estimated bills. Now, I now have a Google Calendar alarm that goes off every single month on the exact date that I need to supply my meter reading so that I don't make the same mistake again. But it really opened my eyes as to the complications that can arise if you are not meticulous with this kind of thing. Not only that, it also turned me off Iran for the rest of my life here, and I do not use them anymore because their customer care when they were in the wrong was absolutely shocking. So you live and learn, but essentially be super meticulous with any energy providers that you have. There is an ombudsman facility that exists here in Italy should you have any problems and you need some independent advice. But in order to contact them, you must have tried to initiate a dispute with the company itself first and not got anywhere. And then that's when they will step in. But also, like, consider changing companies as well. Like, gas and electricity, there are multiple companies now that offer these services. So if you're not happy with your existing one, consider switching. And there are a few websites that you can go to in Italy with that will give you like alternative prices and even help you through that switching process. So definitely a valuable lesson learned. Lesson number 2, evidence everything. Now, this again was a lesson that I learned the hard way in Palermo. Palermo taught me a lot. I'm very glad I lived there for 2.5 years. But essentially, it was to do with the change of my residency. Now, I have what is known as a carta di soggiorno, which is a residence card issued to people from the UK who are living here pre-Brexit. Now, this is not a mandatory card. It is not the same as a permesso di soggiorno, but still it is becoming increasingly important to have this document because Italian offices just don't know how to process you otherwise as a British citizen. So anyway, I transferred to Palermo and I was fully expecting the change of residency process to take like no more than 40 days, which is the average duration time. And I was actually impressed because when we transferred, we realized that you could actually do the whole process online through the ANPR portal. So I completed it. I submitted all my documents. I was like so happy. Anyway, a couple of months rolled by and we hadn't had any kind of update. Our case was still pending. And even my boyfriend, who is Italian, had this pending case on his profile. And so we decided to go to the residency office in person to understand what the issue was. And the issue with my residence change was that they didn't know how to process my carta di soggiorno. The ANPR system apparently wasn't equipped to deal with that, only with a permesso di soggiorno. So the residency office, to cut a very long story short, told me to go to the questura, which was wrong. They told me to do many other different things that were not correct. I sent them multiple PEC emails, which were all completely unresponded to, which finally resulted nearly 6 months down the line in me turning up again at the office and just literally being like, here are all the PEC emails I've sent you. Here is all the information you've told me to do, which is completely wrong. Here is all the documents to show you that I do not need to do anything different to register my change of residency. Can somebody please do it? And lo and behold, on that very same day, they registered the change of residency for me. But what that taught me was that you have to evidence everything. The first thing you're going to want to get when you move to Italy is a PEC email address, because that is your evidence. With a PEC email, it's like the equivalent of a recorded or registered letter, in the sense that when you send that email, you have legal proof that you have sent it to the address and that it has been received by the other email account. So they cannot claim that they didn't receive it, it bounced, it didn't deliver, because your PEC account will always tell you if that is the case. And so as PEC emails have a legal window of response time of 30 days, the fact that I had gone 60 days with no response to 2 different PEC emails showed that I had a case to go back in person and say, look, what is the problem? And that's the thing, evidence in everything. I am a stickler for this. I usually request that all communication be in writing when it's to do with something official, because we all know that lovely Latin proverb about words flying in other cases. But just make sure that you gather everything. Make sure you get a PEC email. Make sure that if you are dealing with any kind of important correspondence, it's usually to another PEC email address, because then that just gives you that added layer of security. But it's this. It was a hard lesson, very stressful to go through that, considering that I hadn't anticipated it would be such a problem. And it was so refreshing in a way to move back to the Salerno province, and they processed my residency within a month. And that is exactly how it's meant to be. It all depends on where you go to in Italy, but just make sure that you are evidencing everything, because I promise you it's going to help you so much in the long run. Lesson number 3, don't believe everybody. This is a hard lesson that I actually learnt a couple of years ago in my job when I changed schools, and I was working here in Salerno, and I was told by my school that I needed to open a partita IVA. Now, if you don't know what a partita IVA is, it is essentially your ability to work as a freelancer. And I was told that this is the way that this school operated. All of the teachers that worked for them did so under a partita IVA. Now, I enjoyed my job at that school, and so I was happy to go through that process, but I was super naive about what that actually meant in terms of my obligations to that school, because a few months down the line, I had a funeral to go to that was connected to my boyfriend's family, and I asked to go to this funeral, and I was flatly refused by the school because they didn't know how to organise the parents and the children that were supposed to be coming to my classes. Now, I did push and I did go to that funeral in the end, because I couldn't believe that I would be denied such a request. But actually, it was only later on that I realised that they shouldn't have even denied me in the first place. When you open a partita IVA and you work at a school, you are working as a freelancer. That means that you can tell them when you're available and when you're not available. The school cannot dictate to you that you have to be available on a particular day and work a structured timetable. If they do that to you, that means that you need to have a contract. And I didn't know that at the time. And I allowed that school to make me feel rubbish for months because I'd decided to go to a funeral and kind of gone against what they said. But you need to know this. I promise you. And then later on, when I left that school to move to Palermo, I left and my pay was late. My final pay was late. And I was like, where is it? And I'd been messaging the head of the school, who previously had responded to my messages, but just ghosted me after I left. And then I was messaging other teachers, and some of them came back to me and said, oh, it's just going to be a bit late this month. But I wasn't happy with that, particularly because the head of the school wasn't responding to my messages. So I managed to locate the PEC email address of my school, sent the PEC email, and lo and behold, I got a response and a pay couple of days after that. And that's how it is. don't believe anyone. Like, and I know that this is really, really extreme, but here in Italy, not everybody is trustworthy. And, I look at that experience at that school and it taught me some of my biggest lessons in terms of not believing everything that everybody says to you. So take things with a pinch of salt, do your research. Now I'm like super with boundaries, with researching things. When people tell me something, I'm like, I'm just going to double check that because I've learned through my own experiences that it's very important that you do. So learn from me, question things that people say to you, do your due diligence, double check a few things here and there if you're not sure or something doesn't sound quite right, because sometimes it doesn't sound right because it isn't right. Lesson number 4, a smile doesn't mean a friend. Now, when I first moved to Italy, coming from London, I was blown away by how open people were here in the south of Italy. Like everybody would say hello to me, even people I'd never met in my life before. I'd always be greeted with a smile every time I went into a shop or into a bar or restaurant. I just was like, how did I end up living in such a beautiful place where people are just so nice? But then I learned the hard lesson in that a smile doesn't mean a friendship. People here in the south of Italy, especially, are naturally warm and open. They will say hello to you, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to make friends with those people. Now, I think where I had perhaps got that a bit wrong was that coming from the UK, where you can walk past 20 people in the street and nobody even acknowledges you or looks at you, to have that kind of warmth when you move here makes you feel that you're going to make a lot of friends and these people are going to be your best buddies. It just doesn't necessarily pan out that way. And what I also learned as well is that people will smile to your face and actually talk about you behind your back. Not everything is genuine here. And I started to realize that actually it's true in the sense that sometimes people can be too nice. And when someone is too nice, it's usually meaning that it's not genuine. I've seen it all. So essentially, what I want to say to you is that this doesn't speak for everyone. There are some great people here, and some of those smiles are warm, genuine, welcoming, and those kinds of people will become your people. And I'm evidence of that. But I've also experienced many a smile that hasn't been genuine and that has only really been for politeness and hasn't really had any depth to it. So just be really, really careful about that and don't necessarily fall into the stereotype of everybody being so friendly here and everybody, wanting to make you feel welcome, because it happens, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have anything substantial on the back of it. And I think that's the part that people often forget. Lesson number 5, everything begins and ends with you. This was one of the hardest lessons that I have learned here, in that personal responsibility is vital. If you move here to Italy and you start to feel quite challenged by the culture here, the way of life here, you're finding it difficult to adjust. It's not the fault of the country. It's not the fault of the systems. Everything begins and ends with you. And some people really struggle with that concept. It's so much easier to blame external circumstances for your life not being how it is, rather than actually looking inwardly and being like, perhaps I'm the person that needs to make the difference. Now, I can say for myself, I struggled at the beginning when I first moved here. I lost my personality, I lost my identity, and I found it really, really hard to rediscover who I was in Italy, like what the Italian version of me really looked like. But through taking personal responsibility, I found the expat community in Salerno and discovering that group of people and getting to slowly build up my confidence again, start to integrate with locals, start to build out my connections, changed everything for me. And that's the same thing that I want to say to you. Like, you have to take personal responsibility for your situation. Jobs I've not been happy in here, even though I've had the elusive indeterminato contract, or even though I've been really fortunate to have a job here in the first place, if I've not been happy somewhere, I've left. Because guess what? Everything begins and ends with me. Why am I going to get stressed? Why am I going to complain? Why am I going to give away my power in this way? If I'm not happy, I'm the person that's got to do something about it. I've made multiple changes to my life over the course of nearly 8 years because I've realized that some parts of my life were just not working here in Italy. And instead of blaming it on systems and processes here, I had to look at the way I was dealing with it and my approach to things. And I fundamentally swear by this principle and this lesson, in the sense that if you move here to Italy and you are struggling, you've got to look inwards, because yes, a lot of it will be down to external circumstances. and things that are out of your control. But there is a lot that you can do about that in terms of your perspective and the way that you deal with things that could make a huge difference to your experience here. So I hope that these 5 hard lessons that I've learned in Italy can help you so that you don't do the same things as me and that you come here a little bit more prepared and a little bit more eyes wide open as to the reality of life in this country. And if you've enjoyed this video, this is the one that I think you should watch next. And also consider subscribing to this channel as well, because I'm all about sharing with you the reality of life in Italy. And if you want to build a thriving life here, that's exactly what you need to know. I will see you in the next video.